All right. So we are, I think, at 14b1. And we are pretty much at the end of the discussion about proving that Abigail, the wife of Naval, was a prophet, right? So she said, we had this very dicey encounter between Abigail and David. She saves her husband's life, and by bringing provisions to David and his men when they're running away from Saul, after her husband refused to do it. David was ready to kill her husband, so she saves his life. But there's this whole sexy interchange between them, according to the way the rabbis understand it. And the last thing that we saw was that David is very, very attracted to Abigail and wants to have his way with her. And she pushes him off and says, no, it's not proper. It's not the right thing. You can't do that. If we look at 14b1, the left-hand side, we'll start from there, the bottom. He propositions her, and then she answered him, this should not be a stumbling block for you. No, don't get yourself in trouble here. Let this encounter between us not become something that you're going to regret later. No way, right? But now the Gemara says, aha, let's really look at that very specifically. Very carefully, what is she saying? So the Gemara finds evidence of Abigail's prophetic gift in the verse just cited. See that at the bottom of the left-hand column. So, Bill, what do you think?
I am available.
All right, thank you.
The Gemara finds evidence of Abigail's prophetic gift in the verse just cited. The exclusionary "this" intimates that there will be another occasion when David will stumble.
When David will stumble.
That David will stumble.
Let this not be a time for you to stumble. Right? Don't do it this time.
And what was that other one? The episode of Bathsheba. And in the end, it was that way. This concludes the proof that Abigail was a prophetess, for she was able to foretell that David would again stumble in a similar way.
Right. I mean, I think it might be simpler to just say she was a woman. And she knew, exactly what kind of guy this David guy was. And she goes, okay, I'm going to, fend off your pushing yourself on me. But chances are somebody's not going to be able to push you away. That's the kind of persistent person you are. So, but the Gemara sees this as proof that she is a prophet, right? She knows that David will stumble. And that's what happened, of course, with Bathsheba. David can't control his own passions, and he stumbles with regard to Bathsheba. Okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the Bathsheba story. That deserves its own attention. It's a story that in the Tanakh itself, David is called to task for it. The rabbis had to struggle mightily because they wanted to put David on this very high pedestal. After all, he is, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. He's the root and branch of our messianic hopes. So they struggle with how to evaluate what David did. But here there's a clear acknowledgement. Yes, David stumbled with Bathsheba. Luckily, he didn't stumble with Abigail, simply because Abigail was a strong enough woman, emotionally, intellectually, and in every way, to withstand his pressures. And now we have a little bit of a coda to that encounter. Okay, and the Gemara continues. No, you're muted.
That was not deliberate, sorry. The Gemara continues to expound on the story of David and Abigail. Yet the soul of my master shall be bound in the bond of life. As Abigail took.
So that's a reassurance. In other words, you're going to stumble, but it's not going to be a mortal, sin that's going to disqualify you and take you out of the bond of eternal life. You will be, vouchsafed a good judgment.
As Abigail took leave of him, she said to him, "And God shall deal well with my master, and you shall remember your handmaid." Rav Nachman said, "It is as the people commonly say, while a woman talks, she spins fibers to make yarn." Others say that Rav Nachman was referring to this adage, "A goose stoops as it goes, but his eyes peer afar."
Okay, so we don't have to read all the notes. She ends up by saying that, so God will be good to you and don't forget about me. So we have the Gemara says, so there is a kind of an interesting, opening up that Abigail has done, because she hasn't closed, she hasn't, just pushed him on his way and says, I'm a married woman, leave me alone. Shame on you, don't stumble. Who knows what's going to happen to you in the future, but, goodbye. What she still says, oh, and by the way, here's my phone number. Right? She says, may God be good to you and don't forget me. Don't forget me. And the rest of the story is that as she comes home, her husband has a heart attack and drops dead. And then David actually takes her as one of his wives. So, the erotic heat that the Talmud reads into this encounter on the basis of what is really there in the biblical text, does in the end have a result where she does take up with David after her husband dies. So what we have in these two folk sayings, right? One folk saying says, it's as the people say this folk saying, while a woman talks, she spins fibers to make yarn. So the image that comes to me is A Tale of Two Cities.
But she was knitting. She wasn't spinning though.
Same thing.
You got it's totally different
she was using yarn.
Drop spindle versus like two knitting needles.
Right. But
the wool is already spun when she's knitting.
Right. But she's talking.
Penelope. Penelope was knitting.
There you go.
Yeah. No, she was weaving.
Penelope was spinning.
She was spinning.
She was actually weaving. She wasn't spinning. She was weaving the cloth.
So many specialized terms for yarn.
Right. So that's the thing. But she could talk and spin at the same time, right? She could chew gum and walk at the same time. In other words,
I can actually still talk and spin at the same time,
even
go. After all these years since I did like those kind of crafts.
I can talk and spin at the same time too.
There you go. See? Now, if you just connect that to like a string and feed into it some fiber, you'll be all set.
Right. And of course, spinning is, a very, very much of a classic women's work. It's one of the things that is understood to be a basic housewifely obligation in rabbinic culture and in that part of the world. And that's why you have all of these stories, Penelope, as well, and so on, because they got to take care of all the chores. They got to do the chores. So the idea is they're doing what they have to do, but meanwhile, they're talking to each other. They're, exchanging gossip. They're exchanging wisdom. They're, information. They can do that
recipes.
Right, absolutely, very important.
It's like a quilting bee.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, and the other one is the goose stoops as it goes. Right. The goose is looking for a piece of corn or a piece of grain or whatever it is that the geese eat. But they're also always looking on ahead to see where, whatever besides this little seed that's right in front of them, they're looking to scouting out. So that also has this idea of Abigail is dealing with what she needs to deal with at the moment, but she's also, she knows now a little bit about what potential future developments might unfold, and she's ready for them. And she ends up being right. You could almost say that this proves that she was a prophet. Sylvia.
I just think it's a very pro-feminist kind of concept that women are really very, very capable, and they are really, don't underestimate them, and B, maybe they really are running the world.
Yeah, well, so we have those arachne, right? Should have spun and weaved less. I think it's woven, weaved.
Woven, probably.
Yeah.
Woven, right.
I don't speak English very well.
All right. So then just talk Yiddish. That's all. So the you could see it as a feminist thing, or you could see it as a fearful, thank you.
Well, the point was that there's not very much that we've encountered that's very pro-feminism, and this is
Well, that's what I'm saying. Seeing that women have power is not in and of itself a feminist perception. It depends whether you think that that's good or whether it makes you afraid. If you think it's good, that's feminist. Then you go, look, women have capabilities, talents, powers, and so on. But too many people, mostly men, but sometimes others as well, see the fact that women have power as something dangerous and as something to be worried about and something to be controlled. So you watch out for those women. If you get a few of those women together, they'll be spinning, but they're going to be talking to each other. We can't let that happen. That's all I'm saying. That it should be a cause for celebration. It should be a cause for saying, hey, look at that. We're all of us endowed by our Creator with gifts and blessings, but too often and for too long, somebody else's power has been seen as my, problem.
Thinking of this, I just saw a book I have as a sample on my Kindle. I haven't read it yet, but the basic idea is a lot of women who get together like in book clubs and stuff like that, but commit retaliatory murders on behalf of each other so that it can't be traced back to the person who would really have a reason to do this. So like if you want to off your husband or your ex-husband and you're at this book club, somebody else will take that job for you, and et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's what they're afraid of. I don't know. Maybe they saw this as a life and death issue.
Right. That's the real meaning of the sisterhood. Watch out. Ay vey. Yeah. All right. So don't read that book. You'll get all kinds of bad ideas. So
I don't care enough about my exes to worry about it. So.
Okay. But nobody's knocking off their future exes, right? Nobody's knocking. So it's only right. Okay. Anyway, yeah. I mean, the idea of the Red Tent, the novel that was written, inspired by the story that we just read this past Shabbat. Hold on a second. Sorry. 1 second, please. So, that book by Anita Diamond is Midrash, an expansion of the story of Dinah, who is in our, like I said, yesterday's Torah reading. And a lot of that book is about, I don't remember, I read it many, many, many years ago. I don't remember all the details, but it was about the power that women have, despite the fact that they are being marginalized. By the very fact that they're marginalized and are put in their own little space, they themselves can have their own book group and share and support with each other. But the whole idea there of Dina going out into the world to look at what's going on, that's the way the story begins, made many of the rabbis super uncomfortable. Instead of saying, "Oh, look, here's a person who has curiosity, wants to is an outgoing person, is interested in the world." Instead, you see what happens? It's blaming the victim, right? What do you expect? Of course, when she went out there, of course she was going to get attacked and by Shechem. So that's the kind of ugly ambivalence that too often has been the position that was taken when women show power. So all of this is making a big deal about, Sylvia, you're celebrating it. I wish that everybody did, but the reality is that it's not always the case. There was all right. There was okay, good. I'll let it go. We'll go to the next story. Yes, unless somebody else has more comments on this. Yes, Josie.
When I worked at the American Jewish Committee, they had a lot of these ethnic group studies going on with sociologists. And we went to a meeting once where some man said, in a Jewish home, in a Polish home, in an Italian home, and so on, the women rule the roost, and they're in charge, and they have power. And my question was, this was back in the 80s, well, if we have power, how come we don't have any power? And it's like a dichotomy.
Yeah, it's a look, power in general is a very problematic phenomenon. You can't live with it. You can't live without it. Some people have said that about other entities, like women.
And dogs.
Dogs. You can't live without them. Period. Of course you can live with them. There's no choice.
Okay.
There was an article in the New Yorker. I think it's this past issue. One of these short treats at the beginning of the magazine about some judge who just retired, and he was a divorce judge. Did you see it, Sylvia? So and his big contribution, and I'm not saying this lightly, his big contribution was he was always dealing with divorces. Divorces are always sticky and too often very, very terrible. And, they're always fighting about the property and so on. And the question was about the dog. So until he came along, the pets, were considered property. So you divide up the property, half the house, half the dog, half the goldfish, and then he laid down a legal opinion that changed people's approach. And he said that, no, the dog is a little bit more like a child, and you have to look at what the dog's best interests are.
The well-being of the dog.
The well-being of the dog. Is it better for the dog to be with this custody or with that custody? It's not just half and half. What if the dog really is somebody's very much this person's dog and not that person's dog? So in the whole story, there's and the last line was the judge saying that people may stop loving their spouses, but they never stop loving their dog. So that's back to the Talmud. So power is a tricky thing, and I think that power, what's it called? Hates a vacuum or something like that. The power that women have had is very often to be seen as this is how we can neutralize that power. right? If you can put it into a sealed box and let it be there, then then we can live with it. And I think that that's been the approach in a lot of patriarchal societies. Now, it's never successful completely, but it's successful enough for the men to feel that they've maintained the power. So it's basically public-private, right? If the men can hold on to the public, gears of the world, then in fact they like it. They like it that they can come home and there's dinner on the table. So giving the women the power to decide what to cook at night, is to my advantage. I heard a good feminist joke a little from to tie things together from one of the African American ministers in town, and she was talking about that her husband wasn't well. We all wished, a refuah shlema and so on, each in our own way. And then she said, why women have to suffer excruciating pain in childbirth? To be able to develop within them sympathy for a man who has a cold. So, I don't know how much she was saying about what was going on between her and her husband, but that's what it is. So yeah, so Josie, it's an ironic, paradoxical situation, right? Women will anybody will take the power that they can, but if somebody else has the power to decide how much power and where you're going to take it, then it's just going to, work itself out that way. There was a couple of weeks ago, we were going to visit friends, and they're active in an Orthodox community. And the guy, a couple, a man and a woman, they're married. The guy said, but at 7 o'clock, I have to go to a lecture by Rabbi so-and-so, who's going to be speaking about the role of women in the home. So Zelda, said, you're going to miss my lecture on the role of male rabbis in lecturing about the role of women in the home. Yeah, that's the way. Yeah. All right. So back to the women prophets. Here we are. We're now to the next one, Huldah. And this is actually, all of the stuff that we've been saying is actually interesting groundwork for this discussion. So a proof that Huldah was a prophet. Back we're at 14b1, right-hand side, the bottom.
All at the bottom. A proof that Huldah was a prophetess. Huldah, as it is written, so Hilkiyahu the priest and Ahikam and Achbor went, etc.
Okay, what's the text? Look at 14. The note gives
14,
you
from 2 Kings chapter 22. The relevant portion of the verse reads in full. So Hilkiyahu the priest and Ahikam and Achbor and Shaphan and Asaiah went to Huldah the prophetess. Scripture thus states explicitly that Huldah was a prophetess.
Okay, so QED, that wasn't too complicated, right?
Not very.
So, okay, so now, but we do need to, well, you know what? Let's just read the editorial comment that follows, the Gemara.
The Gemara now digresses to discuss the propriety of Huldah's prophesying.
Right, which is never a question when we ask about
with a man.
The men.
Yeah.
But let's just go to 14b2 just for the rest of what's the question exactly?
Is a place where Jeremiah was in a place where Jeremiah was the prophet. How did Huldah prophesy? That is, how was she permitted to prophesy? Her doing so was an affront to Jeremiah, who was the preeminent prophet of his generation.
Okay, so you can definitely, read this question with a number of aspects to it, but there's no question, historically speaking, that Yirmiyahu is one of the major prophets of Jewish tradition. He's got a big, gigantic book, in his name, and he's also credited with writing other parts of the Bible. Huldah is a historical figure. We know that she functioned as a kind of a judge or a prophet for a while, but we have no remains of her own work as a prophet. So she is apparently a secondary prophet compared to Yirmiyahu. And now what the Gemara is saying is, but she lives at the same time as Yirmiyahu. She lives at the same time as Jeremiah. So here we have the king and all the king's advisors coming to Huldah, the prophetess, to ask her a question. Why are they going to her? Why don't they go to Jeremiah? And number one, and number two, why doesn't she say, don't go to me, go to the big shot, go to Jeremiah? Why is she answering when there's a greater authority to be consulted? So before we get to the background of the discussion, this is, of course, a question that applies in all kinds of systems of authority and of knowledge, right? Of who do you go to when you need a decision made? And when people feel, how could you possibly have gone to that? Why didn't you come to the boss? Why did you go behind my back? Or why, these kinds of things. In rabbinic circles, this is a question when somebody needs to ask a rabbi a question, somebody will say, Rabbi, I need you to answer this question. Well, you have your own rabbi. Why are you asking me? So there's an etiquette or an ethics, professional ethics that is involved. It happens with teachers as well. That certain people, there's a kind of a turf situation or a kind of hierarchical situation. And there's also, because of the hierarchy, there's also a sense of, why ask me when there's somebody more learned, more qualified? I'm not going to put myself into this discussion when there's somebody who is much more equipped to answer the question than I. So that's the ethics of saying I shouldn't answer, right? Well, of course they asked me, so I answered. No, you can say, please go and talk to the person who is the proper person to address your question to. So here the question is, what's with Huldah? Now, underneath it, is there a question that she's a woman and Yirmiyahu is a man? Could very well be, right? But it's not necessarily the major thrust of the question. Let's look at 15 to get some of the background.
Note 15, excuse me. The events surrounding Huldah's prophecy are recorded in 2 Kings 22, excuse me, as follows. In the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah ordered an extensive repair of the temple complex, the previous one having occurred 224 years before.
You only have to clean your house like every 224 years.
Apparently so. That would be my choice. During the reign of King Yehoash, as Hilkiyahu, the Kohen Gadol, was inspecting the premises to determine which repairs were needed, he discovered a hidden Torah scroll. Our Barbanel states that it was the first original Sefer Torah written by Moses. Instead of being rolled to the beginning, as the Sefer Torah of the temple always was, it was rolled to that portion describing the curses that God would visit upon the Jews for non-compliance with his commandments.
So this story, I'm sorry. So this story is in the Book of Kings, and this is a basic story for Bible critics to kind of date the formation of the Torah, because they read this as actually being a kind of a foundation story. Like this is it, there's a skepticism that they read this story. It's not that they discovered an old Torah. They're presenting a text now and giving it authority by calling it old. But this is, in other words, this is the way they date where Deuteronomy finally makes its appearance. They don't see it as a complete Torah. They see it as the the emergence of the Deuteronomic tradition. So that way they can date it, you know, in the 7th century BCE, right, the 600s or so, right, as the you know, as a way of saying, oh, here's where now we can see where the Torah starts developing. This is the biblical critical approach. The traditional approach says, no, this is, as you see from Abravanel, no, it was the whole Torah. The whole Torah has always been there. It was there for forever, but it was neglected. The biblical criticism question is, are you kidding? You know, they're neglecting the entire Torah for, you know, for generations. You know, that question has actually lost some of its obviousness in modern times. So, all right, let's go.
Hilkiyahu sent the Torah scroll to the righteous king Yoshiah, before whom the scroll was read. What particularly distressed the king was the verse that stated, "The Lord will lead you and your king, whom you will appoint over yourselves, to a nation neither you nor your ancestors have known." It's from Deuteronomy. A prediction of the exile of both Samaria and Judah with its king.
Right, and remember the exile of Shomrei and Samaria, the northern kingdom, had already happened.
In 702 or something like that?
722.
722.
So like 100 years before. So this is a God-fearing monarch in Judea, and he's shook up by the fact that this text of Deuteronomy seems to have predicted the troubles that have beset the Jewish people. And specifically, this is what's called the Tochacha, the admonition. And the admonition is this horrific statement of the suffering and the catastrophes and the exile and the death that the Jewish people will suffer if they don't worship God, if they abandon God, if they betray God. So he's taking this now very, very much to heart and goes, oh no, this is, one second, please. So, so he gets all shook up, and this becomes Yoshia's Josiah, and this becomes a time of religious reform, and he tries to clean up the temple and tries to, you know, get everybody. He starts, you know, reestablishing worship of God and not the idols and not the high places and so on and so forth. So go ahead.
Yoshia thereupon sent Hilkiyahu and the others to Huldah for a prophetic explanation of whether or not the frightful verse indeed applied to him and his generation.
Right. So that's what they now send to her. She's so just as a kind of a, you know, tiny little picture of what's going on, at the same time that the basic overall social reality is neglecting God, everybody's doing whatever they want to do, worshiping pagan deities, there is a recognizable woman of God, right? And there is a recognizable man of God. Jeremiah is known as a person who is against all of this stuff. He's a dissident in the name of God. And Huldah is known as a dissident, as an activist on behalf of God against the overall social reality. But this brings up now the question, why are they sending their question, Huldah, can you please tell us, is God really angry at us? Is this prophecy going to take effect now? Are we, me, Josiah, who I'm trying to serve God, are we going to be exiled? Is this Torah prophecy going to come true against our generation, or is this just a threat in the abstract? So why are they asking Huldah? Why aren't they asking Yirmiyahu? Why aren't they asking Jeremiah? Okay. So, and it's just read 16 just as a, again, historical clarification.
Jeremiah began to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshia's reign, whereas the events referred to here occurred 5 years later.
Based on reading the second book of Kings. Go ahead.
Hence, at that time, Jeremiah was the established prophet. That's Rashi's take on it.
All right, so that's the Gemara's question. So we know that Huldah was a prophet, but now we're just asking a side question. Why is she the go-to person here? Why not go straight to Jeremiah?
The Gemara, however, questions the propriety of King...
No. Yeah, we did that already.
Did we?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Why didn't they go to Jeremiah?
Okay, the Gemara answers, the Academy of Shiloh said he sent his emissaries to Huldah.
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm on 14b, 2, left-hand column. I think we didn't do the one that starts the Gemara, however, questions the propriety of King Josiah's actions.
Well, we did, but you know what? Read it again, especially for you.
Josiah himself, however, how could he forsake Jeremiah and dispatch his agents to Huldah instead? The Gemara answers.
Wait a second.
Okay.
The Gemara
we never did the Gemara replies the Academy of Rav.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got one more up there. The Gemara replies, the Academy of Rav said in the name of Rav, Huldah was a relative of Jeremiah, and so he did not object to her prophesying.
Okay, so that just says, okay, so good, she could get away with it. He wouldn't take umbrage. But that doesn't really answer the basic question at all, does it?
Yeah, no. So the Gemara now questions the propriety of King Josiah's action. Josiah himself, how could he forsake Jeremiah and dispatch his agents to Huldah instead? The Gemara answers, the Academy of Shiloh said he sent his emissaries to Huldah because women are more merciful than men.
So what do you think about that?
I'm not sure I get the connection.
All right, so then read the note.
Note
19. We have these notes, 19.
That is correct, to answer all my questions. This is not to say that Huldah would dissemble and report bad tidings as good, for a prophet is forbidden to alter the communication he or she receives in any way. Rather, the mercy of a prophetess is manifest after a distressing message is received. Unlike her male counterpart, she will exert every ounce of her strength in prayer to beseech the Almighty to change the decree of misfortune to good. That's Maharsha.
So in other words, the question that the royal court has is this coming true now?
No.
This is a biblical prophecy of exile, dispersion, death, suffering. Is this going to happen? Is this directed at us? Is this meant to happen now? So, or do we have time? So they have to ask somebody who has a hotline to God. That's the prophet. So they have a choice now, says the Gemara. They could have gone to Jeremiah, famous for Jeremiads, right? Famous for scorching, bitter admonitions against the people. Or they could go to Huldah, who's a softer, more congenial person. So they decide to go to Huldah. So now what the note is implicitly asking is, what's the difference if the truth is the truth? If God is intending to rain down exile and destruction and so on, right now God is angry, then whichever prophet you ask should be, if they're a truthful prophet, they'll tell you, yes, that's what God wants to do. And that's the job of the prophet, is to tell you truth to power. God is unhappy with you and God is going to do this. So what's the difference if they're asking a gentler person or a harsher person, a person with a harder temperament or with a softer temperament? What's the difference? Facts are the facts. So that's what the note is trying to answer, right? What the note is trying to answer is that should the facts be that indeed God is enraged with this generation, then there's another part of the prophetic job, which is not just simply to stand back and go, I told you so, but rather to then intercede with God and see if somehow God can be persuaded to have mercy, to give an extension, to give people another chance. And that job, falls to the one who is closest to God, to the prophet. We have this all the time with Moses, right? Moses, on the one hand, he says these very words about admonition, that if you don't serve God, watch out, you're going to get it. But whenever there is a crisis in all of the years of his leadership of the Jewish people, on the one hand, he gets very angry. Look at what happens, let's say, with the golden calf. Perfect example. Perfect. With the golden calf, he comes down from the mountain. He smashes the tablets when he sees that everybody is worshiping a golden calf. Right? He excoriates the people. He calls all the loyalists to his side. 3,000 people are executed. Right? There's a terrible, terrible. He moves out of the camp. He says, "I can't stand being with you." All of that is against the people. But meanwhile, he's spending 40 days and 40 nights pleading with God not to exterminate the people. Right? He's the one who constantly argues with God and says, "Give him another chance. Come on. This is your people." God says, "You know what? Forget it. I'll start with you. I'll start fresh." And Moses says, "I'm with them. Erase me from your book. If you don't want to continue with them, I'm not your option. I'm not abandoning these people." So that's the kind of push and pull that a prophet engages in. So therefore, what they're saying is, she would implore God maybe more intensely, more constantly, more emotionally than Jeremiah. So that's why they're choosing to go to her. A little bit of a kind of a tangential kind of connection to this is that when we pray on behalf of a specific sick person, right, and we say, "God will please have mercy and send refuah shleima, a complete healing to so and so, the child of," and who do we say?
The mother.
The mother's name.
Right. Traditionally, the mother. Right. We don't say the father. Before egalitarian times, it was always the father. When you got called to an aliyah, you got called as the child of your father. When you were if you had to sign a document, you said, "I'm the child of my father." It's a very patriarchal idea. All of a sudden, when we come to praying for mercy and praying for healing, we say, this is a mother's child. This is so the feminine becomes the symbol of feeling, of mercy, of compassion, of love, and that's what they're hoping for here. So that's the first answer that the Gemara gives. Okay.
The Gemara suggests another answer. Rabbi Yochanan said, Yeshaya sent them to Huldah because Jeremiah was not there at the time, for he went to retrieve the 10 tribes. And how do we know that Jeremiah restored them? Because it is written, "For the seller shall not return to the sale." Is it possible that after observance of Yovel has already been suspended, the prophet Yehezkel would prophesy that it will be suspended? Rather, scripture teaches that Jeremiah returned the 10 tribes, and therefore the potential for Yovel observance resumed. The Gemara thus proves that Jeremiah successfully completed his mission.
Okay, so we have a number of steps here in this statement. One thing is simply, well, really Jeremiah should have been the one approached. Don't even think that Jeremiah wouldn't have prayed to God for mercy. If that was the situation, then of course Jeremiah would have been, all in on begging God to have pity on the Jewish people. We wouldn't possibly imagine that he would be less compassionate than Huldah. So then why didn't they go to Yirmiyahu? Why didn't they go to Jeremiah and go into Huldah instead? The answer is he wasn't in town. He wasn't there. He was away on business. So that's the answer, period. Now the question is, what do you mean he was away on business? What business was he away on? So the answer is, since we already mentioned that the 10 tribes themselves had been exiled before, about 100 years earlier, so we're now saying that Yirmiyahu tried to now retrieve the 10 tribes and bring them back out of exile. That's what he was trying to do. So that's the mission that he was on. Again, a very compassionate mission, a mission of trying to restore the Jewish people to their homeland and to wholeness among themselves. So he was out. He was out there doing that, and that meant he was out of the land of Israel. He was out of communication, incommunicado. Sylvia, yeah.
I thought that the 10 tribes were never returned.
So that's what we're gonna. So now we have this discussion. So now that what the Gemara says is, and did he succeed? And they now say, Jeremiah, of course he succeeded. Of course he succeeded. He did bring back the 10 tribes. So how do we know this? Because later we have the prophet Ezekiel making these prophecies, right? That's where we have it, right? So that's 22, 24. Right? 20, look at 22, that's the quote, for the seller shall not return to the sale. All right, what is that about? Number 22, the note. It comes from Ezekiel. Ezekiel lived after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, right? So this is the exile of Judah in 586, right? So what is he saying? Go ahead.
Yehezkel uttered this prophecy sometime during the 11 years between the time Yechaniah was exiled and the destruction of the temple. He prophesied that the Jews would soon be exiled, causing a suspension of Yovel observance, so that the seller shall not return to the sale.
Okay, so I'm sorry, actually, at this point, his beginning his prophecy before the destruction itself, but Yechoniah was already exiled. So, right, there's 11 years between the time that the king of Judah is exiled, he's put under house arrest and brought to Babylonia, and then in 586, the entire people are exiled. So Yechezkel is saying that the Jews would soon be exiled, causing the suspension of Yovel. Yovel is the Jubilee, right? This year is a Shemitah year, right? Every 7 years, we have a sabbatical year. And then the Torah says that every 7 sabbatical years, there's a Jubilee year. What happens in the Jubilee year? All properties are returned to their original owners at the time when we first came in as tribes into the land of Israel. When we entered with Joshua into the land of Canaan and took possession of the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan was then divided up into tribal ancestral estates, and those estates were held on to by their families, so that no matter what happened financially or otherwise over the generations, every 50 years there was a reset. And if you had sold your ancestral lands, then you get them back every 50 years. So this is what Yovel does. This is the Jubilee year, right? So that's one of the aspects of Jubilee. Another one of the aspects is what's on the Liberty Bell, right? That all slaves go free, right? We shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. So that phrase is from the description of the Jubilee year, and that's what got inscribed on the Liberty Bell. So Jubilee is this reset. Everybody goes back home and everybody becomes free, right? It's like this wonderful, refreshing, right, rebooting of society. But the rabbis understood that this is an ideal vision that only applies in ideal situations. So therefore, they understood that Jubilee would only apply if there are 12 tribes to be rebooted. But if there is no full representation of the 12 tribes, then Jubilee cannot be a rebooting. In other words, once the system is broken so that we don't have representatives of the 12 tribes that we can point to as trying to come back home, then Jubilee is ineffectual. Jubilee cannot restore them to their homes because they're not here. So you need to have the 12 tribes represented so that then you can then put them back in their places. But if, it's like a puzzle. If, you keep on, dropping the box with the pieces, but you can then bring all the pieces back together again, you can put them back into the puzzle. But if somehow or other, some of the pieces have been lost forever, then you're not making this puzzle, then the puzzle can't be made anymore. So that's the way the rabbis understood the laws of Jubilee. And some of this is ex post facto, because by the time the rabbis functioned in the 2nd century CE, 1st century, 2nd century CE, there was no Yovel. And there hadn't been a Yovel in anybody's memory. Is a good question whether, we have evidence, historical evidence outside of the Bible for the observance of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, continuous observance of that. We have evidence of that for almost, 2,300 years for sure, right? So we have evidence of this going back way, way, way back. But we have never seen any extra biblical references to Jubilee. We don't know anything about Jubilee. The rabbis understood this to be, back to Sylvia's point, that Jubilee stopped being a reality in the 8th century BCE, 1,000 years before they even existed. Because once the 10 tribes were exiled, we lost them. And then there was no Yovel. So now what we have in this particular, in this particular Talmudic text is that at least at the time of the 6th century BCE, there must have still been some kind of shreds of tribal representation so that Ezekiel could say, oh, but now it's going to be over, right? Once the exile of Judah happens, then forget it. So then Jubilee will be a dead letter. So that's, so 200 years, they've extended, they've extended the Jubilee a little more closer to recent times, another 200 years. But in terms of, again, rabbinic, it's still 800 years before, 700, 800 years before the rabbis were functioning. That there is no evidence, there is no recollection, even biblically, of the Jubilee year. Sylvia.
The Jubilee year concept, I'm beginning to think, was a flawed concept. No, I'm quite serious. Maybe I should say, maybe it was a flawed concept and therefore really never followed, because if you think about it, it's disruptive to the general course of society if you suddenly undo everything that had been happening during those 49 years. And where do those 49 people, the evicted, go?
They go back to their home. The beauty of this system in the ideal is,
but how do you work it? Everybody's, everybody's displaced. It doesn't seem to be a humanly possible, workable solution.
Right. There are definitely challenges. And like I said, we have no evidence that it ever got really put into practice. And I've done a lot of work actually on this, on the difficulties and the obstacles in putting any of this into practice, including the sabbatical year laws. But to just defend the ideal means that everybody knows this from the get-go. Everybody knows. So for instance, according to the rabbinic, and this is of course post facto, according to the rabbinic picture of things, that means that when I sell my home, I'm really only giving you a 49-year lease. Everything is, and we know that in other legal situations, 99-year leases and stuff like that. There's always a retention that everybody has of their estate, of their assets. So the way that the society is supposed to be functioning is actually from the beginning. It's not supposed to be a shock. It's not like all of a sudden I pull out this title and you thought it was yours and oh my God, now I'm going to get dispossessed. Everybody knows that whatever it is that they're doing is provisional and temporary and meant only to last for those 49 years. What that will do to the development of an economy and a society is something for us to speculate about because we're not trying it. But let me just say the other side of it. You know, you're saying it's flawed because what, you know, it can't work. I'm living in a world where, as far as I'm concerned, the systems that we've developed are totally flawed because I don't think it's working. So, you know, maybe this other way of getting people to be a little less sure about how much they can hold on to, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad idea if we could have made it work. Yeah, Sylvia.
So now I'm going to go many thousands of years forward and many thousands of years backward. The Israelites went into a land where there were people. Did they perhaps, they had to be some societal organization. Who knows if they had something similar? Okay, so going forward, if this is leaving the Canaanites to the side for the moment, that whole history, has this ever been applied to the whole Middle East situation by some groups?
What do you mean applied by, what do you mean?
The rights to the land of Israel.
So this is an interesting question. I've written a little bit about this actually myself. I can't get it published, but it's one of these days, you know, they'll discover these papers and they're going to go, oh, look at this amazing.
Look at what Greenstein got already.
Oh, wow,
oh my God.
Right. It's a very complicated set of questions that you're asking.
And may I just add to it? I don't know what other societies, what the Arab societies, if they have anything similar.
Right. So the quick and ready answer that I'm going to give you is that there are, I mean, this is both a biblical criticism, biblical scholarship question, and a broader question of history and economic history and agricultural history and so on of the region and so on and so forth. So, and how they work with each other. My summary that as I see it is basically there is, I think, a preponderance of opinion that this is a revolutionary idea. There are certain kinds of here and there. Oh, look at that element. That sounds like a little interesting. That look at this ancient thing that was going on in the classical world and so on and so forth. But this is all part of a big package that basically has been recognized as a pretty unique package, and that's the package of Shabbat. So the Shabbat idea for a seventh day, every seventh day, a day of rest, that was a unique idea. It was unheard of in the ancient world. The Jews created this. Then the seventh year and the 7 sevens, that's all an expansion. And the word Shabbat is used. Oh my God. Hold on. So the word Shabbat is used in each of these categories. So it's one big gigantic Shabbat idea. So there is a certain amount of uniqueness to it. But on the other hand, what I would point out is that there is a very universal, it's all over the world, east, west, north, south. There is a term that now we use it in an extended way, and that's the term called the commons. The commons is the idea of approaching some resource without having a specific owner to it. And in Arab lands and in traditional places all over the world, in England and other places, the town commons. What's the town commons? The town commons is this idea that like someplace in the middle of town, there's this area that belongs, it's open access for everybody, right? The whole idea of the internet was supposed to be to create a virtual commons. But in many, many places, specifically, for instance, for grazing, and for farming. The idea of a commons was a very powerful institution, which said we all need to subsist. We all need to be able to eat. We all need to be able to have our animals eat. So if we divide up the land, I've got these 10 feet, you've got those 10 feet, we're asking for trouble. What if we just like completely open up, this whole range of stuff and let everybody benefit from it as much as they want? The whole ranchers versus farmers question was about that. It was partly about that, right? So it got infected by individual claims of ownership. But that kind of idea is a big, gigantic idea, which I have argued that's right. That's part of the problem with, so Stewart says, then we get tragedies of the common. That's a phrase that was made in the 60s and has become a classic phrase. The tragedy of the common is if nobody owns, specifically, this particular resource, then who's going to control how it's used or abused, right? Fresh water should be a commons, right? If people dump all their pollution into the water because they want to, they have access to the water and they can do with it whatever they want, then what happens is that everybody suffers. So who's going to enforce that kind of control, since there's nobody who can say it's my water? You're trespassing when you dump your stuff into my water, or using up something. If I've got more cattle than you, and I bring my cattle to the commons and my cattle eat up all of the grass and don't leave any for you, then what? So these are examples of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons, where we're supposed to all live and let live, but how do you control people's selfishness in that kind of situation? That's a very simplified idea that I'm talking about. There are answers to that don't. So the regulation, says Stewart. So regulation is one answer, but regulation has historically been not simply regulation, but appropriation. So for instance, there's a long history in England that's been studied by all kinds of historians, where basically the idea was that ownership is the answer, because ownership was imposed by the government. So there was a displacement of farmers and peasants and so on, and this became, and don't take this personally, Sylvia, but the argument in modern times, and big British philosophers, I forget, if it was Locke or other these guys, they made the argument that it was right to expropriate commons lands from the peasants because they don't develop it. Development gives you the right to take something, because God doesn't want us to just be lazy, and God doesn't want us to just not make the world more and more, interesting and productive and so on. So this is part of the Western hubris because commons tends to be linked to subsistence existence. And capitalism is precisely about this entrepreneurial idea of, if I can benefit, I'm going to work harder. And if I can benefit, I'm going to develop this thing, and I have a stake in it. So therefore, I'm going to make it happen. Hold on, I didn't see the chat. Sidebar, Rabbi and Stewart, you are both rocking the hoodies. Very nice. Oh, thank you. Okay.
I just want to add one more thing, which is that we could take it one step further and bring it right up to date. Public health, commons put to public health.
Absolutely.
Vaccine mandates. There you have it. Same discussion.
The pandemic has opened up this whole commons thing once more, because the pandemic doesn't respect borders. It doesn't respect privacy. It says, look, in a certain sense, in some really basic, fundamental way, this world is a commons. And if we don't get it, then we will eventually just destroy ourselves. So not just each other, we'll destroy ourselves. So how we're going to get this, that's why the Yovel idea is not, with all of its practical challenges and flaws, there's something here that either we're going to pay attention to it, or we're going to drown, or we're going to suffocate. We're going to die.
Or we figure a way out.
We have to, and this is pointing a basic element of what that way out will have to be. And look at how much we don't want to do it. Look at this whole Glasgow business.
The environmental, I was going to say the whole environmental issue.
Yeah, this is like crazy, right? So, just a few rich people are going to be able to have oxygen tanks and the rest of us are just going to, die. I don't get it. Yeah, Josie.
Have you seen the commercial where the dinosaur addresses the United Nations?
No.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the smartest and cleverest things I've ever seen. He gets up before the UN and he talks about extinction. And he says, we had an asteroid. You guys are doing it to yourselves.
Right. What's this a commercial for?
I was going to say.
For Exxon.
It's to promote addressing climate change.
Right.
But I thought it was very smart and realistic.
It's too realistic. What can I say? It's very tragic. Let's wrap up for today, though, by saying that these different steps in the argument are part of this actually, quieter, easier going discussion, which is why was Huldah consulted? Because Yirmiyahu was on this mission to save the Jewish people, and he at least temporarily succeeded. But in the end, of course, we know historically that the exile happened in the Babylonian times, and whether we date, and there are long notes here as well, whether we date the dispersion of the permanent loss of the Jewish unity to 722 or to 586, in the end, for us, it doesn't matter. It's thousands of years ago. This whole sense of an ideal possible society was lost. The idea of Shemitah, though, not being lost is very, very, very interesting, right? We never gave up the 7-year cycle of the sabbatical year. The Yovel we gave up, or it gave up on us, or just history gave up, but we fought at considerable sacrifice to hold on to Shemitah. And to this very moment, to this very day. So something to take to heart. All right, we're going to finish that up for today. Next week, we'll still learn, right? Even though it's the Thanksgiving weekend, we can all just, be picking our teeth from the leftovers and zoom in, right?
Stuart, stay on for just a second if you can.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to leave without ending the meeting for everybody.
Yes, everybody. Stay safe.